The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening and welcome to Reproaction's Act and Learn webinar for the month of March 2019. Tonight's topic is important and timely. Let's get real with facts about later abortion. First, we'll introduce your host. The first voice you hear is myself, Erin Matson. I'm one of the co-founders and co-directors of Reproaction, and I am based in Arlington, Virginia.
And I am Pamela Merritt. I'm the other co-founder and co-director of Reproaction, and I'm based in St. Louis, Missouri.
Welcome, and we're so glad you joined us tonight. So a quick buzz through of the agenda. We're going to introduce Reproaction, then we'll ground this discussion in talking about later abortion, and then we're incredibly excited for our knowledgeable lineup of panelists tonight. We have Sruthi Chandrasekaran from Ibis Reproductive Health, who leads the Later Abortion Initiative. We have patient advocates and advocate rock stars, Erika, Christensen, and Garin, Marschall, co-founders of RHAvote. And then we have Chelsea Souder, who is the Clinical Services Director and Communications Director for abortionclinics.org and directly works in patient care. From there, we'll move to next steps and then Q&A. You can put in your questions for the panelists or for anyone on the Reproaction team into the chat box at any point. You don't have to hold them to the end. We'll get to as many as possible at the end. And if you are on Twitter, you are more than welcome and encouraged to live tweet. And just please use the hashtag Reproaction. With that, I will pass it to Pamela.
Thank you, Erin. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Reproaction, Reproaction leads bold action to increase access to abortion and advance reproductive justice. We are proud of our left flank analysis, our willingness to hold folks on all sides accountable, whether they identify as allies or opposition, and our commitment to nonviolent direct action. Erin?
Thanks, Pamela. All right, so we're going to lead off this later abortion conversation starting with values. Here's a first value to offer. Every abortion story is valid, and every person who seeks abortion care deserves non-judgmental healthcare, respect, and support. We must and do reject frameworks that try to uncover and judge the mindset and circumstances of people terminating pregnancies to create a rank order of so-called good abortions and bad abortions. That is not correct. There are simply abortions. We listen to and honor people who have abortions, and we put people who have abortions first, and we center them in our narrative. And we appreciate abortion providers for providing compassionate, quality care to patients around the country. Currently, as we're talking about values, we have to acknowledge, and this is something that's painfully clear to me as a resident of Virginia, which has been ground zero in the middle of a coordinated bad faith national attack against later abortion, against parents, and against later abortion parents. I want to be clear that we, as advocates for abortion rights and reproductive justice, have absolutely no reason to be defensive about later abortion, which is a critical and at times literally life-saving care for women and people who can become pregnant. And while we should not be reticent or ashamed, there is no question that abortion opponents should be defensive and ashamed for the conversation that they're currently having about later abortion. They are lying about later abortion. They are demonizing expectant parents, people who have abortions, and doctors by suggesting outlandishly that people are carrying pregnancies to term and enduring labor and birth in order to request infanticide. This is not happening anywhere. And I want to underscore what an incredible insult it is to expectant parents, people who have abortions, and doctors to even suggest this. They are also showing incredible callousness in the face of abortion storytellers, as well as parents who have shared painful stories of losing their newborns to tragic health conditions. and they have been employing false incendiary rhetoric that promotes violence and threats against abortion providers and supporters of abortion rights. So I want to be clear, extremely clear, that this webinar is important and it is designed to help arm you with facts about later abortion, with truth about later abortion, with the reality of later abortion, so that you feel fully comfortable having a conversation about later abortion with your head held high. It is the other side that should and must be ashamed. We hold our heads high and we speak truth with love and light. And that is our core value. So before we get into a presentation from Sruthi, I want to highlight that the term late-term abortion, which you'll often see in the media, is not a medical term, and there is no such procedure as a late-term abortion. It was invented by anti-abortion activists as a tool to stigmatize abortion care. Many of what anti-abortion activists will call, quote unquote, late-term abortion bans are actually second trimester bans calculated in order to challenge the framework established in Roe versus Wade. And the purpose of doing that is to overturn the federal constitutional right to abortion when an agreeing Supreme Court majority has been obtained. And now that Justice Kavanaugh has been confirmed to the Supreme Court, that time is now. There is now a 5-seat majority on the Supreme Court poised to overturn or gut Roe v. Wade. And one primary avenue of doing so is trying to both tell lies about later abortion, but also claim that something that is not a late-term abortion ban actually does ban late-term abortion, and the real thing that they're after is overturning Roe v. Wade. So I want to be clear, and Reproaction has always held this throughout our campaigns and work, whether we're talking about later abortion as we are tonight, whether we're talking about destigmatizing abortion care, period, whether we're talking about our work on self-managed abortion with pills, that no matter what the law says, people will always need abortions, including later abortions. And if this is something that people may not realize immediately, but I want to be clear because we are on the precipice of Roe v. Wade being overturned or gutted at any moment, that if Roe v. Wade or the federal constitutional right to abortion is overturned, we can expect the need for later abortions to increase. And that's because lack of access to care creates delays for people who would have otherwise been able to complete their abortions earlier at less cost and with less complex care. And so as we face the very real possibility that Roe may disappear soon, we need to, more than ever, shore up access to later abortion because we know that the need for it is going to increase. And so with that, I will pass it to Pamela to introduce Sruthi.
Thank you so much, Erin. So Sruthi Chandrasekaran is a senior project manager with Ibis Reproductive Health. She manages projects focusing on increasing access to safe abortion in restrictive settings in the United States and internationally. Her past work encompasses a range of roles, including field-based qualitative and quantitative research, monitoring and evaluation, policy and advocacy, and partnership management. Prior to joining Ibis, Sruthi was a research specialist at the Department for International Development, DFID, New Delhi, managing a range of research projects across South Asia on issues including abortion incidents and intimate partner violence. Sruthi is a Woman Deliver Young leader and has a master's in economics from the Indian Institute of Technology, ITT Madras, and a Master of Science in Comparative Social Policy from the University of Oxford, United Kingdom. Welcome, Sruthi.
Thank you, Pamela, and thank you, Erin. Hi, everyone. I'm Sruthi. I'm very happy to be here. I manage our work under the Later Abortion portfolio and coordinate the Later Abortion Initiative, also known as LAI. Next slide, please. So established in 2010, LAI aims to protect and expand access to abortion after the first trimester using a variety of strategies, including designing and implementing rigorous research, working with clinicians, and supporting advocates on the ground with evidence-based research. Next slide, please. I wanted to provide some context as to why we're doing this work. I apologize that this diagram is probably not very clear, but it's our theory of change. Less than 9% of abortions in the United States occur after the first trimester, and only 1.3% of the abortions that take place are at 21 weeks gestation or after that. But we see so many policies that restrict later abortion, and these are not evidence-based. And all of this is fueling myths and misperceptions and misconceptions about later abortion. As Erin mentioned, with the current political climate and the mounting restrictions, more and more people, especially those who are younger, who come from low-income backgrounds and rural populations, are going to find it increasingly difficult to access abortion earlier in their pregnancies, access information about abortion and services, and this is going to lead to an increased demand for later abortion. So what we want to do is to improve access to later abortion care in the United States by bringing together multidisciplinary stakeholders to catalyze change on the ground. Next slide, please. Hopefully this little box is a little clearer about what we do. The way we work is to drive change through partnerships, and we have been over the years forming a range of partnerships with clinical staff, with researchers, with advocates, both at the state and federal levels. And we essentially develop tools, interventions, and research that would improve referrals for later abortion care, that can help build partnerships with state-based advocates to develop advocacy tools. We're also working on expanding the number of sites where later abortion is available. And we're striving hard to change the conversation around later abortion, especially working in tandem with movements like the reproductive health and reproductive justice movements, working with the disability rights folks and others. And we're developing and disseminating evidence-based information on issues related to later abortion. And through all of this, we're hoping that we can respond to threats and emerging issues, and in the long run, help to improve access to services and information on later abortion. Next slide, please. Just a quick note about our advisory board. Over the years, we've had an amazing set of people we've been working with. Our advisory board consists of giants from the field, and they've helped us figure out what our vision is and how we can get there, and have been very crucial in developing later abortion, the Later Abortion Initiative, to where it is today. Next slide. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about our different activities, just to give you a flavor of all the kinds of things that we do. Next slide. To start off with an example, I wanted to talk a little bit about our work on shortened procedures. And the reason we refer to the study this way is basically because abortions at later gestational ages could take 4 or 5 days because of mandatory waiting periods in many states, because cervical preparation takes about 3 days. And this can result in large burdens on people seeking abortion, because they're going to have to arrange for accommodation for an extended number of days. They may lose wages from not being at work. They may have to arrange for childcare, and so on. So we are working with clinics in 6 different states in the United States that provide later abortion procedures in 1 or 2 days, thereby substantially reducing the number of days a client may have to spend to receive care. And we're doing this using a mixed methods approach. We're reviewing over 1,500 medical charts, where we've interviewed clients who have received the shorter procedure, and we've also spoken to providers who are doing this work. And we're using all of this evidence to document the safety and the effectiveness of using these shorter procedures. And one of our longer term goals is to convince other providers who might be currently using a longer procedure to consider using these shorter cervical preparation techniques that can substantially reduce the burden on clients. Next slide, please. Another example that I wanted to talk a little bit about was our work on improving referrals in the state of Maine. In 2014, there was no clinic that was providing abortion services in 81% of Maine counties, which is where 55% of Maine female residents live. And there was no clear referral process that existed among the 4 clinics in Maine, which resulted in a lot of clients being referred out of state and having delays in their in receiving the care that they need. So we collaborated with 4 abortion clinics in Maine to develop a toolkit that can help these clinics implement a streamlined referral tool to decrease out-of-state abortion referrals, and specifically for later abortion. We also convened an annual stakeholder meeting so that the clinics can start building the long-term relationships that they would need to be able to continue referring clients in a sustainable fashion. And so through our efforts, we conducted a baseline and an endline, and we noticed that there was a 33% decrease in out-of-state referrals. So for instance, instead of a client with a medically complex condition being sent all the way to Boston, now that person would be referred to within the state, so their travel would be reduced by over 100 miles. Next slide, please. So that was an example of something we've done at a state level. There are some other strategies that we've adopted to improve referral processes. For instance, we're currently working within a hospital setting to understand how referral systems can be improved. We're also working to update and share referral lists of later abortion providers to clients, to advocates, and to maternal fetal medicine specialists. And these are some pictures of a recent brochure that we developed, which has details of the later abortion clinics and the services they can offer. And we also maintain an updated map. You can see a snapshot in the slide. So this is a map basically of the different, the upper gestational age limits up to which each of the states permit abortion. And you can access all of this on our website, laterabortion.org. Next slide, please. So I already talked a little bit about the first 2 streams of work, so I'm going to skip that. But I wanted to take a couple of minutes to talk about some other strategies we're using to identify barriers, document them, and provide recommendations to improve access. For instance, we recently completed work on documenting the perspectives of later abortion doulas and how they impact abortion care. As many of you already know, abortion doulas are those who provide in-person non-medical support to individuals, both before, during, and after their abortion. But there is very limited documentation of their impact or about the work that abortion doulas do in the literature, and virtually nothing about later abortion doulas. So what we're hoping to do with the interviews that we've conducted is to describe the experiences of these doulas in providing support to clients, and thereby illustrate what patient-centered care, later abortion care, could look like. We're also close to launching a new study, which is documenting what traveling for later abortion care could look like, what it currently looks like, and how the client experience of abortion travel can be improved. Because from the way things are moving, people are going to have to travel more and more for abortion care and for later abortion care. So we're planning to interview clinicians. We want to work with staff at abortion funds and reproductive justice organizations to understand how they're supporting clients, and to understand how clients themselves have been undertaking travel, how they make that decision, what goes into implementing the logistics needed to carry out travel, especially out-of-state travel, and recommendations on how this travel experience can be improved. And we also recently supported some ongoing research within Ibis on how on transgender populations, and including questions specifically relating to gestational age limits, and what support can be provided for gender expansive individuals' reproductive health relating to abortion. Next slide, please. One of the other ways we help shift the conversation has been to develop and disseminate evidence-based fact sheets on a range of topics. For instance, you can see these are our new fact sheets on who are the people who need later abortion in the United States and why, what a later abortion procedure entails, and busting some myths around the concept of fetal pain, what actually is the science behind viability, and what does the evidence say on mental health and abortion. And we have 4 of these fact sheets that have also been translated into Spanish. We've shared it with over 350 advocates and allies, both globally and nationally. And approximately 200 copies were downloaded from our website just in the last year. Next slide, please. Related to Later Abortion Initiative is our network called the Later Abortion Network, LAN. To me, LAN is the way we talk about our later abortion issues and our research with our later abortion community of advocates, researchers, and clinicians. We have over 230 members in our network, and some of the examples of the calls we've had are on this slide, and some of our future calls are also listed here. We were, incidentally, we were very privileged to have Erika and Garin, who will be speaking next, to speak on LAN a few weeks ago. And so I'm very excited to hear them speak again. But in the upcoming weeks, we also have presentations on how we as a community can work with maternal fetal medicine specialists. And then following that, we have a presentation from the New York NYCLU and the National Institute for Reproductive Health, talking about the RHAvote and its implications for later abortion. And something that I'm personally very excited about is a presentation on patient-centered pregnancy tissue viewing and what that might look like. So we have an exciting lineup of calls, and if folks on this call are interested in being part of our network, please reach out to me. Next slide, please. We also disseminate 2 newsletters in the spring and in the fall, where we share updates from all of our members and a roundup of the latest publications relating to later abortion. And we also disseminate other related resources like the fact sheets. That's just a snapshot of what our newsletter looks like. Next slide, please. And here you can see some of the scientific evidence, the recent research papers on later abortion, and also updates from our members. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to highlight a few sort of key achievements from our team in just the past year. We were working with 4 states to expand, with clinicians in 4 states, to expand the upper gestational age limit up to which their clinics were offering later abortion care. And we were doing this primarily through consultations with other clinics to understand how they've done it and sort of lessons learned, and also linking them to resources. We also recently created a new website, new section on our website with resources on disability rights and how we can fight bans that are sort of focusing on disability. Next slide, please. That brings me to the end of my presentation. Like I mentioned, if you have any, if you have interest in knowing more about any of the work that I've talked about, I'd be very happy to follow up either now or later. And thank you so much, Reproaction, for this opportunity to present an insight into our later abortion portfolio. Thank you.
Sruthi, thank you so much for your presentation. That was highly informative, and I've already seen a few questions come up, but I want to encourage folks, if you have questions for Sruthi, feel free to put them into the question box now, and we'll get to as many of them as we can at the end. And with that, I am very pleased to introduce Erika Christensen and Garin Marschall, who are patient advocates for access to abortion throughout pregnancy. Their work focuses on centering the voices and narratives of patients in the fight for reproductive rights. In May 2016, Erika was denied an abortion due to New York's 24-week cutoff. The couple traveled to Colorado to terminate her pregnancy at 32 weeks, and they co-founded RHAvote, a grassroots advocacy campaign they developed to raise awareness about New York State's cruel and unconstitutional abortion law, and were instrumental in the passage of the Reproductive Health Act. So Erika and Garin, thank you so much for making the time to join us tonight.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Great. So let's start here. You've been public about your later abortion story, and thank you for that. It's important for people to step back from the political aspects of this debate and hear from patients themselves. And we'd appreciate you sharing your story with our listeners tonight.
Sure. So we were living in New York at the time. And 30 weeks into a complicated pregnancy, we found out that something had gone wrong and that it was no longer viable. In our case, ours was a wanted pregnancy, and we'd sort of, through complications, hung on to hope for months. And so when we found out that it wasn't viable, we were devastated. We also understood from our doctor that the pregnancy was now a risk to Erika's health due to some prior health issues. And so we really didn't hesitate or equivocate about our decision. We consulted with our doctor, and we knew that we wanted to terminate the pregnancy pretty much right away. And that's when we found out that due to the law in New York at the time, our doctor, who we'd been seeing for months and sort of struggling through this pregnancy with, who we trusted, was not able to help us anymore. And I think that's a point that, like, a lot of people don't realize about this, is that there's often a point where someone has been struggling through a pregnancy with somebody, and then suddenly has to, for instance, fly across the country and see someone they've never met before. And that's what happened in our case. Our options were to carry the pregnancy and sort of see what happened, which again was a risk to Erika's health, or to leave the state for care, which is what we ended up doing. We ultimately went to Colorado and saw Dr. Hearn at the Boulder Abortion Clinic. He administered it, and at this point we were at 32 weeks. So we found out that the pregnancy was not viable at 30 weeks, and then at 32 weeks we were able to go and get the care. It took a couple of weeks to coordinate the care between multiple doctors.
And that's, again, I want to note that, or flag that, in our case, we're middle-aged. We are very comfortable with travel more generally. So it took us 2 weeks to facilitate the travel necessary to get to Colorado at that point. And that is like while working with all of these different doctors to get together on the same page for my care plan. So you can imagine people that are younger or not used to travel, or you can think of a million scenarios where this would be a lot harder for people. So for us, under the very best of circumstances, it took us 2 weeks to get ourselves to Colorado.
And, when we got there, we in our case, a lot of people that go for an abortion that late in pregnancy do a longer procedure that takes place over a number of days with these clinics. In our case, again, due to some health issues, some prior health issues, doctors decided that the best course of care was for Dr. Hearn to administer a shot to induce fetal demise. And then we flew back to New York for an induction. And obviously flying to Colorado in the midst of all of this, after finding out this terrible news for our pregnancy, was emotionally very complicated and awful. But beyond that, we had to get together, travel, we had to rent a car, find a hotel. We had to get together $10,000 in cash. Many people who go through this and do the full procedure, it costs $25,000 to $30,000 out of pocket. Due to a number of reasons, a lot of these very late providers can't take insurance because they don't get reimbursed by insurance. We were only reimbursed for a small portion of it after spending 5 months haggling with the insurance company. So a lot of this, there's an incredible burden to even accessing this care. And due to sort of a lot of reasons, we were privileged enough to be able to get the care that we needed. But that's sort of when we started to realize how problematic that was, what the law was asking people to do, and how many people might be left outside of that because they wouldn't be able to get that care.
So lastly, I'll just say, we could not control our pregnancy going wrong. In fact, I think we did everything right, according to our doctors. We also can't change the fact that bad pregnancy outcomes happen, or that people will need abortions throughout pregnancy because life is complicated. As long as there are people who can get pregnant, there will be a need for abortions at all points in pregnancy. What we can control is how society and systems make that experience so much harder or worse.
And ours was a wanted pregnancy. We had a medical indication, and so it's sort of a sympathetic story. Erin talked a little bit about this notion of good and bad later abortions. And I just want to point out that we support everyone being able to access care throughout pregnancy. Our story is not representative
of everyone.
I just want to thank you both for sharing your story here as well as widely. I appreciate how that is not easy, or how there are very bad actors in this space, and I want to just thank you, and I also want to acknowledge the horrible thing that you went through, both with the wanted pregnancy going wrong, and then also to be treated that way by the state is outrageous. So I want to pivot to the next question. You are rock stars, and you were vocal and indispensable advocates for the recent passage of the Comprehensive Reproductive Health Act in New York. What does this law actually do, and how do you feel about the way that abortion opponents around the country have twisted this law, now that it has been passed, to lie about later abortion patients and call for the criminalization of abortion in the United States?
Sure, thank you. Let's start with what the Reproductive Health Act actually did for the citizens of New York, and I'll try to keep this short. First, it decriminalized abortion. It brought abortion out of the criminal code, specifically the homicide section, and into public health law where it belongs. Number two, it finally brought the law into compliance with the federal standards set by Roe. Before the RHA, the state's law allowed for exceptions to the crime of abortion, in quotes, for any reason up to 24 weeks, and after 24 weeks, only when the life of the pregnant person was immediately threatened, which is an incredibly high bar. There were no exceptions for maternal or fetal health indications. The RHA added exceptions after 24 weeks, specifically for cases where there's a threat to the health of the pregnant person or the pregnancy was determined to be non-viable. Next, it clarified that qualified advanced practice clinicians can provide abortion care within their licensed scope of practice. So when the old New York State abortion law was written in 1970, there was no such thing as licensed midwives or nurse practitioners. The RHA modernized our state abortion law, removing physician-only language, so that these professionals were allowed to, but I want to note, advanced practice clinicians were already allowed to administer abortion care in 16 other states when the RHA was passed. So this was hardly a radical provision, though it was exploited by the antis. For citizens in more rural parts of our state, allowing professionals to practice the medicine they're fully capable of doing will help bridge the access gap, we hope, and patients will be able to get the care they need when they need it instead of being pushed further into pregnancy. Lastly, The RHA established some fundamental rights into our law to choose or refuse contraception and sterilization, and to determine the course of one's pregnancy within the limits of the law's restrictions on later abortion. So it's worth noting, I think, the way the law falls short and leaves some patients out. So someone seeking an abortion after 24 weeks who does not meet the requirements for those exceptions laid out in the RHA will still be denied care. So if they faced delays and couldn't access the care in time, if they got new information later in pregnancy, if they have a doctor who interprets the health exception narrowly, the RHA doesn't apply to them. So I will note that we certainly tried within our ability to get a bolder law passed, but we did face opposition to that. That's despite a new overwhelming pro-choice majority in our state legislature. That is another discussion. I will say, if anyone is interested in reading more about the RHA and New York State abortion law specifically, we would direct you to talklikeapro.com. For the second half of your question, how we feel about the way abortion opponents across the country have twisted this law,
I think it's fair to say we're both disappointed and unsurprised. Obviously, the opposition is very savvy in terms of their strategy, and they saw an opportunity with the RHA passing and sort of jumped on it. And I think in some ways our side of the movement was maybe not quite ready for that, and I think there's some lessons there. I think it's important to note that we need to have a plan in place, both when trying to pass a law or when a law does pass. And I think that's something we can look at going forward, sort of as a larger movement. The other thing is that the sort of messaging used by the opposition really depends on people like us and other later abortion patients not being part of the conversation and staying quiet. And so that means there's a lot of power in patients speaking out and organizing.
Thank you. And that's a great seg to my next question, which is to please tell us about the recent abortion patients letter that you organized. What is it and why did you organize it?
So after the backlash to the RHA and some of what happened in Virginia, we saw a lot of discussion about later abortion, as I'm sure all of you did, and none of it reflected the experiences of later abortion patients. And so part of what we wanted to do is provide some context and sort of speak out. People who had sought later abortions weren't being interviewed, their stories weren't being discussed as part of that bigger discussion in the mainstream media. And we also knew that Trump was going to speak about it at the State of the Union. So we organized a letter, over 140 patients signed on to it, and the only sort of breaking point on who signed it and who didn't is that it represents patients who terminated abortions after 20 weeks. And a lot of the people that signed on to the letter sort of came out for the first time. A lot of them have not spoken to their families or friends about later abortion. And so a lot of them told us their stories and started coming out about it. You can see the letter at abortionpatients.com.
And I'll also just mention, I'm a member of a support group, especially for people who ended wanted pregnancies. We have over 1,000 members now. I just want to mention that the effects of the recent anti-choice later abortion rhetoric, the effects on our community has been really, really devastating. Many folks are not out to even their friends and family. This is of course, a result of the dangerous stigma perpetuated by even their faith leaders, people they love. So to hear their stories twisted in this way, when they believe they made the best, most compassionate choice for their families in line with their value systems, has been incredibly heartbreaking. But it has also been incredibly galvanizing. So patients are starting to feel more mad than sad, and we've seen a lot of them come out in the last month, and we hope the letter was a good opportunity for them to do so. We're also proud that partners signed on in support of the letter. it might make sense to maybe say just something quickly about men, Garin. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, just very quickly, I think that like men don't need to wait to be invited or expect outsized credit for participating. Like men just need to get off the bench and jump into the fight. And you know, the only men in this conversation don't need to be on the wrong side of the issue. So it's definitely time for men to sort of say how this is affecting them and to talk to the people in their lives that have maybe experienced abortion and sort of step up for them.
Erika and Garin, thank you for your work, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. I want to encourage folks, I'm sure there are a lot of questions and comments, and I want to encourage folks to put as many of those as you'd like in the chat box, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end. I'm going to pass it now to Pamela to introduce Chelsea Souder.
Thank you so much, Erin. Chelsea Souder, MPH, is Director of Clinical Services and Communications Director for abortionclinics.org. She serves as a spokesperson for Dr. Leroy Carhart. Welcome, Chelsea. Chelsea, are you there?
Oh, can you hear me?
I sure can. Hello, welcome.
Perfect. I want to thank Erika and Garin as well. As someone who is a clinic provider, I so much appreciate when patients come forward and feel empowered enough to be able to talk about their experience, because as you said, it's so impactful and so instrumental in moving this care forward in the future. So thank you for that.
So true, so true. And thank you for your work as Clinical Services and Communications Director for Dr. Carhart, who provides abortions, including later abortions, in Nebraska and Maryland. So my first question is, what do people who may need a later abortion need to know about getting ready for the procedure itself? What can they expect?
Okay, so we provide advanced gestation abortion, is what we refer to it as, but later abortion in Maryland. In Nebraska, we have a 20-week ban, so we're not able to go past that. And the care that we provide in Maryland, really it looks like patients either calling or emailing to schedule appointments. We accept both ways because we do serve a lot of people who are not from inside the United States, and so potentially phone calls aren't really as easy for those patients. So scheduling their appointment is pretty intense for a lot of people because it's not, like a 5-minute phone call where you can just call and pick a date, get a quote, give your insurance information, and show up with a copay. As Erika and Garin kind of alluded to earlier, there's a lot that goes into getting an appointment actually set and getting someone to it. Because later abortion typically takes anywhere from 2 to 4 days. Getting someone's logistical stuff ready, like travel, childcare, lodging, meals, transportation, making sure that they have a support person with them, making sure they have all the funding available. So if they unfortunately don't have the amount of money it costs out of pocket, we, really work hard with them and dozens of funders across the country to help financially assist them. And then of course, insurance, which is another mess and another webinar to have. So that process we try to make as easy as possible, but it typically takes a few days for everyone to at least get most of that stuff in order or understand a good understanding of it. And then once a patient has scheduled a procedure, really just depending on medical history and how far along they are in their pregnancy depends on how many days the process will take. On average, it's anywhere from 2 to 4 days. Most of our patients are looking at 3-day procedures of the people that we see in Maryland. So the first day they come into the clinic, it's just kind of a check-in day. We have to go through all the preliminary health workups. We do ultrasounds, we do lab work, and we have a really in-depth conversation between our healthcare providers and the patients and their families or support systems about what this procedure looks like, make sure they fully understand what to expect each day and what to expect in their recovery when they go home. And so it's a really deep informed care process. And then once that's done, we do start the procedure on the first day, so they don't actually have a waiting period, which is nice because a lot of places do. And so that really just depends for patients on what procedure they're doing. But we typically do an injection, as Erika and Garin referred to earlier, that causes fetal demise on the first day. And then over the next few days until we are ready to finish, we're basically just getting their cervix ready for dilation over a slow process. And then on whatever their last day would be, we're either doing an induction or a D&E, which is the two processes that we use. And then they recover in our clinic, typically 1 to 2 hours, and they're able to return home the same day. As many people probably have heard, abortion is extremely safe when done in a clinic, done in a setting like this, and it's a lot safer than childbirth. And so, so people are really surprised to hear that patients, can recover fairly quickly and return to normal activity for the most part the same day. So yeah, I think hopefully that covers everything.
That was
what it would look like for a patient.
Thank you so much for that information. So my next question is, and you touched on this a little bit, and we've heard this obviously throughout this webinar, but if you could correct 1 or 2 common misconceptions about later abortion for the general public, what would you let people know?
So, well, the most important one, in my opinion, and we did touch on this earlier, is that it's not always possible for a pregnant person to get an abortion as soon as they would like to. So there's many things that stand in someone's way, from not being able to afford it, to having to travel, either in your state or even out of your state, or even out of the country for some people. Restrictions that have been put in place by anti-choice politicians that are completely unnecessary. So all these barriers and the unnecessary restrictions that have been, put in place in each state prevent people from accessing abortion when they decide it's the right decision for them. And in turn, just like you saw in Erika and Garin's case, it typically prolongs access to care. And sometimes that's by a few days, and sometimes that's by a few months. So I think that a lot of people don't understand that it's not this, this one-stop shop. You can walk into your doctor's office or your OB-GYNs or wherever you're at and just say, hey, I really need this abortion. I've come to this decision. Or, like they said, they diagnosed you with some sort of fetal anomaly or maternal health problem, and you should be able to access care with your provider, but that's just not how it works. So there's a lot of barriers that restrict access. And then I think, of course, what's really relevant, which we were just talking about, especially with RHA in New York and everything that's kind of happening in Virginia along the East Coast currently, the rhetoric that the anti-choice movement has kind of conjured up, talking about infanticide or abortions up until birth or ripping babies from the womb, all this crazy, irrational, inflammatory rhetoric is simply untrue, and it's misinformation. It's just false. And really, I think they've conjured all of this up to kind of drive their base and distract from the true agenda, which is obviously to basically push abortion care out of reach, to shut clinics down, to throw women and providers in jail. The truth is, at every point in pregnancy, a woman's health should drive important medical decisions, not politicians who are not medical experts. You're here.
So thank you for that. And my final question is, I know that there are a ton of grassroots reproductive justice activists who are listening to this webinar or who may listen to the recording. And how can we help? What should activists and supporters know about supporting abortion providers and patients?
So there's a million things I could tell you to do. I'll give you a couple of them here. The biggest one, I think, is to support your local and national organizations, but especially on the local level. And so that's from clinics, like independent clinics that provide abortions, to organizations like, your local NARAL chapter, or the Center for Reproductive Rights, or your state ACLU. There's so many different organizations that have reproductive justice or reproductive health initiatives that you can be involved in. And I think it's not just giving money and donating, which is also amazing, and that's great, but also using your time to volunteer or your expertise to somehow give back, or even your social media platform, however that looks for different people. For providers, I think it's really important that people work with us and not for us. So we tend to get lost in this thing where people kind of assume what we need or what our patients need, and they just go and do it. And that's great. I think the intentions are good, but what's really helpful is if you contact your local clinics and the local people that are doing the work already and ask how you can be of help and get involved directly with them. I think, of course, also supporting providers, just writing like letters to providers about, you know, what they're doing in support, writing letters to their landlords in support, because I can tell you almost every landlord of an abortion clinic has gotten hundreds of letters against what they're doing. So supporting the people that are working with them, vendors, if you know of the vendors that are made public, which typically aren't public unless it's on the anti side, but you know, bio-waste companies and places like that have a lot of harassment. So if that's something that's publicly known, it's really nice for people to have that support. And then a huge part for providers also is if there's any services or contacts for services that you can offer up. We tend to have a difficult time, and I can speak across the board here for abortion providers, we tend to have a difficult time finding companies or contractors or vendors, for example, that will work with us because they don't want to have the exposure, they don't want to have the harassment. So if there's people out there that you know are pro-choice or pro-abortion and are willing to work with, you know, clinics and providers, really kind of making those connections and networking is super crucial for us. And then, of course, I mean, there's lots of other things about volunteering for a local clinic or an abortion fund is amazing. They have so many different volunteer opportunities, from escorting patients to event planning and fundraising and lobbying and advocating. And then another really good one that some people miss is exposing fake clinics. So there's fake clinics out there, and there's a whole campaign called #expose fake clinics that's run by Lady Parts Justice League. And they have really simple things that you can do, like leaving Google reviews on crisis pregnancy centers to really tell people like what they're doing, and liking the reviews that are actually accurate information and not the lies, you know, or leaving good reviews on abortion clinics on their Facebook or their Google accounts and things like that. So
thank you so much. And I would be remiss if I didn't point out that we also have a campaign to expose fake clinics. So our supporters can log on to reproaction.org and find awesome information, including a database of all the fake clinics in the country. So thank you for that plug for that campaign. Chelsea, thank you for your information. If you'll hold on, I know we've got questions, and I'm going to hand it over to Erin.
All right, thank you. All right, so what can you do? First and foremost, support the decisions of pregnant people. Learn about the laws in your state and engage with your elected officials. Step up and step forward. If your elected officials make harmful statements about later abortion, call them out with a letter to the editor in your local newspaper. And be sure to check out the Later Abortion Initiative, which Sruthi leads up, as well as the, as well as Later Abortion, or the abortionpatients.com. And I apologize for that. And then plug into Reproaction campaigns. I greatly appreciate that Pamela just lifted up the incredible amount of resources that we have for folks who are interested in engaging on fake clinics. We have a comprehensive directory of all the fake clinics in the United States. And we also have action kits about that help you. Do you want to throw a protest outside of one? We can support you with that. And we've got resources about how to do that, model press releases and the like. I also want to highlight that Chelsea also touched on the true agenda of abortion opponents, which is to push abortion out of reach and put women and abortion providers in jail. And we actually are running a Stop Prosecuting Abortion campaign that you can find on our website, where we have videos where we've been talking to abortion opponents about their views on women going to jail for self-managing their abortions. We actually just released a new video today that's extremely disturbing, with big dollar donors to the Susan B. Anthony list, a prominent national anti-abortion group, reacting to real stories of women going to jail for self-managing their abortions and saying things such as, she should have never gotten pregnant. in response. So you really need to see these for yourself. And please check out the resources on our website. You can also sign up for alerts at www.reproaction.org. If you sign up for that, you won't miss a thing, and you'll get invitations to these monthly Act and Learn webinars that we do every month. And please follow us on social media. We are Reproaction on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And please save the date for our next webinar. In April, we will focus on examining environmental justice. So save the date and sign up for our email alerts, and you'll get your invitations. And we look forward to seeing you then. And with that, I'll pass it back to Pamela for the remaining Q&A with the time that we have.
Thank you so much, Erin. So we have a lot of questions, which is awesome. And I'm going to try to get through as many of these as possible. The first question, I believe, is for Sruthi. And it is the graphic, the later abortion care findings available somewhere online?
Thanks for that question. It's not available on our website, but if you reach out to me on my email or at lai@ibisreproductivehealth.org, I can send you the details of the study. We should be publishing our results soon, so I can send you the papers once they're out. Thanks.
Thank you. And another question was about, for you, Sruthi, is about how whether people can join LAN, and is it open to advocates, medical students who want to be abortion providers?
Yes, it's open. We'd love to have you. It would be great if you could email me, and then I can add you to our listserv. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And then we had a question about, and I think this one is about it just in general, OBGYN absence in abortion provision and advocacy. And I think, Erika, if you could just touch on that. I know that there's obviously student groups that are working to increase that advocacy, but how do you feel about providers in advocacy?
Oh, providers are crucial. I want to highlight the work of Physicians for Reproductive Health. Everyone could check out their resources online and read about the incredible work they're doing, lobbying, educating. Answer, Dr. Grossman at Answer, and other providers who are doing amazing work in research and doing a lot of work in education, both with other providers and just the general public. I think providers are doing a lot of work to abortion providers to reach out to MFM OBs. I recently spoke at the Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine conference, and they are just starting to bridge that gap between family planning and general OB, and I think they're making really meaningful strides there. I think we'll start to see some really incredible work out of that organization as well.
But yes, there's also more room for providers to sort of be a little more vocal on this, and that's something we'll all be encouraging them to do, I'm sure.
Got it. Thank you so much. And this question is open to whoever would like to take it, but that I live in Missouri, and there's an ongoing dialogue about doctors being trained on how to provide abortions, and then the broader question of how many doctors are getting trained on how to provide later abortions. And I think you touched on that a bit, Chelsea, but are we facing a limited number of providers even as we're facing this fight to expand access?
Yeah, so I can speak on that a little bit if you'd like. So one of the missions that we have in our clinic in Maryland is training and teaching. We train at both of our clinics, but of course, because later abortion is at jeopardy, as you stated, there aren't many providers who are doing that care, and there's only a handful across the whole country here. So what I can say is, yes, we're at a shortage, but at the same time, there's a lot of work being done to recruit future providers and to train them. Every clinic that provides later abortion care right now is training providers. We're not necessarily training providers that maybe will take over the facility or take over that care, but what's really exciting is that we're training providers so they're really educated on how this process works. They're a part of the process, and so when they leave us and move on in their career, whatever that pathway looks like, a lot of them have been very vocal about supporting abortion care and actually providing abortion in their practice to whatever limits are allowed wherever they're located. We have providers who come from us from all over the country and actually outside of the country. So I can tell you that everyone who is in this fight is fighting as hard as we can to train as many people as possible. But of course, the other side is also doing what they can to scare a lot of people from providing this care.
Yeah, thank you for that. We have time for one more question, and this one is for Garin and Erika. Are there any specific do's or don'ts for clinic escorts or talk line volunteers or other non-clinical people who may find themselves talking with later abortion patients and their loved ones?
I think it's important not to make any assumptions about how the person views their pregnancy. It's important to ask. So for instance, some people, it might have been a wanted pregnancy, others it's an unwanted pregnancy. Some people might have experienced delays to care. So I think that there's a lot of careful wording and stuff around this issue, and I think that can be good, but I think it's always important to sort of talk to the person and let them, some people say baby, some people say fetus, and that's okay.
Yeah, I also think I also just want to acknowledge that, this isn't a comfortable issue for everyone. I mean, we literally sit around and talk about later abortion all day. This is, we're pretty passionate about expanding access and advocating for patients, but most people are not even people within our own movement. Many of them are uncomfortable talking about this. I think that's okay. I think we acknowledge that it can be uncomfortable, but that the best way to get comfort is by practice, by continuing to talk about it and ask questions if you're unsure. And as Garin said, just to try not to make assumptions and to stay open and take the patient's lead.
Thank you so much. I would like to thank Sruthi, Erika, Garin, and Chelsea. This has been a phenomenal webinar, and thank you to Aaron Matson for pulling this together. And I super look forward to sharing this with a broader audience when we send out a recording. As always, you can reach us at reproaction.org, and have a great evening, everybody.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you.